The child they rejected would become the one they could never forget. The grand ballroom of the Brooks family estate had witnessed countless celebrations over the past century, but on this autumn evening the silence felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers suspended above the polished marble floor. 3 generations of the Brooks family gathered beneath portraits of their ancestors, dressed in impeccable black tuxedos and elegant evening gowns, honoring the birthday of the family's oldest patriarch. Every table sparkled beneath warm golden light. Every guest understood the traditions that had shaped the family's legacy, and every conversation revolved around power, respect, and the future of the Brooks name. At the center of the room stood Nathan Brooks, the Korean Mafia boss whose calm presence carried the weight of generations. His tailored black tuxedo fit perfectly, yet nothing about his expression suggested celebration. While relatives laughed softly around him and business partners congratulated his grandfather, Nathan's eyes wandered toward the towering entrance doors as though he had been waiting for someone the rest of the family had long forgotten. His grandfather noticed. "You have hardly spoken all evening," the elderly man said quietly. Nathan answered with the same measured tone he always used. Sometimes the most important conversations begin after everyone stops talking. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the ballroom doors slowly opened. A cool autumn breeze drifted inside, carrying with it a quiet presence that immediately drew every eye in the room. Grace Johnson stepped cautiously across the marble floor wearing a modest navy blue dress and a simple wool coat that revealed none of the elegance surrounding her. Her natural curls framed her face, and despite the uncertainty in her eyes, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. She did not arrive to interrupt the celebration. She came only to return something that had belonged to Nathan years before, hoping to leave quietly before anyone recognized her. Holding her left hand was a little boy no older than 3. Noah Brooks wore a neatly buttoned sweater, tiny khaki pants, and polished brown shoes that looked almost new. His wide, curious eyes wandered across the magnificent ballroom with innocent wonder, completely unaware of the invisible lines dividing one family from another. Grace gently whispered for him to stay close, but children often followed curiosity before instructions. While she paused near the entrance searching for a member of the household staff, Noah noticed Nathan standing beneath the enormous family portrait at the far end of the room. Without hesitation, the little boy smiled with pure excitement, released his mother's hand, and ran across the ballroom as fast as his small legs could carry him. Guests stepped aside in surprise as the cheerful child crossed the polished floor. Nathan remained completely still. Every heartbeat inside the room seemed to stop as Noah reached him, wrapped both tiny arms around Nathan's leg, and looked up with the brightest smile anyone had seen all evening. "Daddy," the little boy said happily, loud enough for every guest to hear, "I finally found you." Crystal glasses froze in midair. Conversations disappeared into complete silence. Grace's face turned pale as she hurried forward, knowing the moment she had spent 3 years trying to prevent had arrived without warning. Nathan slowly lowered his eyes toward the child holding on to him, and for the first time that evening, the guarded expression he had worn before the world quietly disappeared. 3 years earlier, Grace Johnson had arrived at the Brooks estate carrying nothing more than a small suitcase, a folder of employment papers, and a quiet determination to rebuild her life. The mansion stretched across acres of carefully maintained gardens, its limestone walls glowing beneath the morning sun like a place untouched by ordinary worries. For Grace, it was simply another job, another opportunity to earn an honest paycheck after losing the elderly woman she had spent years caring for as a home health aide. She never dreamed that the estate would become the place where every hope and every heartbreak of her future would begin. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, the longtime house manager, greeted her with professional warmth before explaining the household rules. Respect every member of the Brooks family. Speak only when necessary. Never interrupt private meetings. And above all, remember that tradition guided everything inside the estate. Grace listened carefully, nodded with quiet confidence, and promised she would do her best. She had never been interested in luxury or status. She only wanted stability, dignity, and enough income to build a better tomorrow. From her very first day, she worked with remarkable care. She remembered everyone's favorite tea, polished every room until it reflected the afternoon light, and often stayed late to help older employees finish difficult tasks before returning to her small room in the staff quarters. She never complained, even after 12-hour shifts, because gratitude had become stronger than exhaustion. The other employees quickly noticed that kindness followed her wherever she went. If someone forgot lunch, Grace quietly shared hers. If flowers in the garden began to wilt during a summer heat wave, she watered them before anyone asked. Even the estate's aging golden retriever seemed to wait for her every morning beside the kitchen door. Nathan Brooks noticed those little moments long before he ever spoke more than a few polite words to her. One rainy afternoon, he returned unexpectedly from a business meeting and walked through the library, expecting to find it empty. Instead, he saw Grace kneeling beside an antique bookshelf, carefully repairing a torn family photo album instead of throwing it away. Every faded photograph received the same patient attention, as though strangers from generations earlier deserved the same respect as those still living. Nathan paused without announcing himself. Most people would have replaced it, he finally said. Grace looked up, surprised to find him standing there. Some things cannot be replaced, she answered gently. Sometimes they only need someone willing to care for them. Her words were simple, yet they lingered with Nathan long after he left the room. Over the following months, brief conversations slowly replaced silent greetings. They spoke about books left on library tables, the changing colors of autumn leaves, and the neighborhood children who laughed outside the estate gates on their walk home from school. Grace never treated Nathan like a powerful man whose name appeared in newspapers. She spoke to him with quiet honesty, never seeking favor, never expecting anything beyond ordinary respect. For Nathan, whose life had always been measured by responsibility instead of sincerity, those moments became unexpectedly precious. Neither of them realized that while the Brooks family continued planning a future built on generations of tradition, another future had already begun taking shape in the quiet spaces between ordinary days, where kindness spoke louder than power and two very different lives slowly found the courage to move in the same direction. Seasons quietly passed through the Brooks estate, and with each passing month the distance between Nathan and Grace grew smaller without either of them intending it. Their relationship was never built through grand declarations or dramatic promises. Instead, it was shaped by ordinary moments that most people would never notice. Nathan often returned home long after sunset, exhausted by endless meetings and responsibilities that had followed him since childhood. Yet no matter how late he arrived, he always found a warm cup of tea waiting in the library. Grace never asked whether he wanted it. She simply remembered that he preferred tea instead of coffee after difficult days. Nathan never thanked her with elaborate words. A quiet smile became enough. It slowly became a language only the two of them understood. Autumn turned into winter, and one snowy evening the estate lost electricity for several hours during a powerful storm. While most employees gathered near the kitchen fireplace, Grace carried blankets upstairs for the older members of the household. Nathan found her struggling to lift a heavy storage box filled with emergency supplies. Without saying anything, he took one side of the box while she carried the other. They walked through the silent hallway together beneath the soft glow of battery lanterns. "You never ask anyone else for help," Nathan observed with quiet curiosity. Grace smiled gently. "People already have enough to carry. I try not to become another burden." Nathan looked at her for a long moment before answering. "You have never been a burden." Those simple words stayed with Grace long after the lights returned. They began spending more time together whenever circumstances naturally allowed. Sometimes Nathan would pause in the library while Grace organized old books. Other evenings they walked through the estate gardens after everyone else had gone inside, speaking about childhood memories, favorite authors, and dreams they had never shared with anyone else. Grace confessed that she hoped one day to own a small family cafe where every customer would feel welcome regardless of who they were. Nathan admitted that despite everything he possessed, he had never truly chosen the direction of his own life. Around Grace, he discovered something unfamiliar but deeply comforting. He could simply be himself instead of the future head of an influential family. Their growing closeness did not escape every eye inside the estate. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes quietly noticed the way Nathan's expression softened whenever Grace entered a room. She also saw the careful respect both of them maintained, never crossing professional boundaries or drawing unnecessary attention. She said nothing because kindness deserved the chance to grow without interference. Unfortunately, not everyone remained unaware. During a formal charity dinner, one of Nathan's older relatives casually remarked that the future of the Brooks family depended on a marriage worthy of their name. Nathan answered politely, but the words settled heavily inside him because he understood exactly what they implied. A few days later, while arranging flowers in the estate conservatory, Grace accidentally overheard two visiting family members discussing Nathan's future. They spoke confidently about an upcoming introduction to the daughter of another influential family, describing it as a perfect match that would strengthen the Brooks legacy for generations. Grace quietly lowered her eyes and continued arranging the flowers as though she had heard nothing at all. That evening, she avoided the library for the first time in months. Nathan waited longer than usual with an untouched cup of tea resting beside him, wondering why the room suddenly felt so empty. Neither of them realized that the greatest challenge to their quiet happiness would not come from a lack of love. It would come from a family tradition that believed some futures should be decided long before the heart was ever allowed to speak. The weeks that followed carried a quiet sadness neither Nathan nor Grace could hide from themselves, even if they tried to hide it from everyone else. The estate continued moving with the same polished routine it always had. Breakfast was served precisely at 7 o'clock. Meetings filled the afternoons. Family dinners followed long-established traditions. Yet beneath the orderly rhythm, both of them understood that something precious had begun slipping beyond their reach. One crisp spring afternoon, Nathan received a formal invitation to join his grandfather and several senior family members in the private conference room, a place reserved for decisions that shaped the future of the Brooks family. Heavy oak doors closed behind him as portraits of previous generations seemed to watch in silent approval. His grandfather folded his hands before speaking. "The time has come for you to fulfill your responsibility." Nathan remained calm. "What responsibility?" An older uncle placed a folder on the polished table. Inside were photographs of Victoria Bennett, the accomplished daughter of another respected family. She was well educated, admired in social circles, and according to every relative present, the perfect woman to stand beside the future head of the Brooks family. "This marriage will strengthen both families," his grandfather explained. "Affection grows after commitment. That is how our family has survived for generations." Nathan closed the folder without looking at the photographs again. "What if my heart has already chosen someone else?" The room fell completely still. His grandfather answered without anger, only with certainty earned through decades of tradition. "Then your heart must learn discipline." Nathan understood there would be no further discussion. He left the room carrying a silence much heavier than the folder he had left behind. That evening, he found Grace arranging fresh flowers in the sunroom, where golden light poured through towering glass windows. She smiled politely, but he noticed the sadness she could no longer hide. Before either of them could speak, Grace quietly said, "Congratulations." Nathan looked confused. "For what?" She lowered her eyes toward the white lilies resting on the table. "Everyone in the house is talking about your future engagement." The words lingered painfully between them. Nathan stepped closer. "Grace, listen to me. Nothing has been decided." She finally met his eyes, and for the first time since they had met, her calm confidence seemed fragile. "Maybe not by you," she answered softly, "but it sounds like everyone else has already decided." Neither of them noticed Mrs. Eleanor Hayes quietly passing through the hallway outside. She saw only two people standing several feet apart, saying almost nothing, yet she understood more than either of them realized. Sometimes silence revealed love more honestly than words ever could. Over the following days, Nathan searched for opportunities to speak with Grace, but she gently kept a respectful distance. She remained just as dedicated to her work, greeting every employee with kindness and carrying out every responsibility with quiet excellence. Yet the easy conversations they once shared slowly disappeared. Grace had made a decision in her own heart. She refused to become the reason Nathan stood against his family, no matter how deeply she cared for him. She believed real love should never demand that someone abandon everything they had been born to protect. Nathan sensed her pulling away, but every attempt to close the distance only reminded him of the walls his family had spent generations building. For the first time in his life, he realized that the greatest prison was not made of locked gates or stone walls. It was the expectation that some people were allowed to belong while others, no matter how kind or worthy they were, would forever be expected to stand outside looking in. Grace spent the next several weeks convincing herself that distance was the kindest gift she could give Nathan. Every morning, she completed her duties with the same quiet dedication, greeting every member of the household with respect, arranging fresh flowers throughout the estate, preparing guest rooms, and helping Mrs. Eleanor Hayes oversee the daily routines that kept the mansion running with effortless precision. No one could see the private battle hidden behind her gentle smile. She simply refused to allow her personal feelings to become another burden inside a family already determined to choose Nathan's future for him. Nathan, however, could no longer pretend that silence would protect either of them. One evening, after the last guests had left a formal charity reception, he found Grace standing alone in the estate greenhouse, watering rows of white orchids beneath the soft glow of hanging lanterns. Rain tapped gently against the glass ceiling while the scent of fresh soil filled the quiet room. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Nathan stepped forward and said, "I have spent my entire life doing what everyone expected, but the only time I have ever felt completely honest is when I am with you." Grace slowly set the watering can aside, her eyes glistening with emotions she had tried so hard to hide. "That is exactly why you have to let me go," she whispered. "I will not become the reason your family loses faith in you." Nathan shook his head with calm certainty. "You are not taking anything away from me. You reminded me that my life belongs to me as well." For the first time since they had met, Grace allowed herself to believe that perhaps love did not have to remain a quiet secret forever. Their relationship grew naturally after that evening, still private, but no longer hidden from their own hearts. They shared early morning walks through the gardens before the household awakened, laughed together over simple breakfasts in the staff kitchen when Nathan returned from overnight business trips, and spoke openly about the future they both dreamed of building. Grace described the little neighborhood cafe she hoped to own someday, where every customer would be welcomed with warmth instead of judgment. Nathan smiled every time she spoke about it, because he could picture every detail through her eyes. A few months later, Grace noticed that ordinary mornings no longer felt ordinary. She became unusually tired, lost her appetite for certain foods she had always enjoyed, and finally scheduled an appointment with her family doctor in town. She expected a routine explanation. Instead, the physician smiled warmly before sharing news that changed her entire world. Grace sat quietly in the examination room, holding a small envelope containing the first ultrasound photograph. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming realization that a new life had already begun. That evening, she met Nathan beneath the old oak tree overlooking the estate gardens, the place where many of their quiet conversations had unfolded. Without saying a word, she placed the envelope into his hands. Nathan looked at the photograph, then back at Grace. His eyes filled with joyful disbelief before a peaceful smile slowly appeared across his face. He gently took both of her hands and said, "This child will always be loved." For a brief moment, the future seemed brighter than either of them had ever imagined. Neither realized that beyond the estate windows, unseen eyes had already begun noticing changes that would soon force every secret into the open, placing not only their love, but also their growing family before the judgment of generations unwilling to welcome what they could not control. The truth remained hidden for only 4 days. Grace had hoped for more time, just enough to decide how to tell the family without placing Nathan in an impossible position. But the Brooks estate had always been a place where even the smallest changes rarely escaped notice. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes quietly observed Grace becoming pale during breakfast preparations and insisted she sit down for a few minutes. Although Grace tried to reassure her that she was simply tired, the older woman recognized the gentle glow in her eyes that often accompanied life-changing news. She asked no questions and offered no judgment. Instead, she squeezed Grace's hand with quiet understanding. Unfortunately, not everyone possessed the same kindness. During a weekend luncheon attended by several members of the Brooks family, Grace excused herself after feeling unwell. One of Nathan's aunts noticed the concern on Mrs. Hayes's face and allowed curiosity to become gossip before the afternoon had ended. By sunset, whispers had spread through the estate faster than the evening breeze moving across the gardens. The following morning, Nathan received an unexpected request to meet his grandfather immediately. As he entered the private study, he found nearly every senior member of the family already waiting. Their expressions carried disappointment rather than anger, as though they believed an unfortunate mistake could still be corrected. His grandfather spoke first. "Tell us the rumors are false." Nathan did not hesitate. "They are not rumors." Silence settled over the room. An uncle leaned forward with visible concern. "You are still free to make responsible decisions. This situation does not have to define your future." Nathan understood exactly what those carefully chosen words were meant to imply, and his answer remained calm. "This child is my future." Several family members lowered their eyes while others exchanged uneasy glances. His grandfather rose slowly from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the estate grounds. "For generations, our family has carried obligations greater than personal desire," he said quietly. "One emotional decision can alter everything we have spent decades protecting." Nathan stepped closer, his voice respectful but unwavering. "If protecting our family requires abandoning my own child, then perhaps we have misunderstood what a family truly is." Those words ended the meeting. No one raised their voice. No one argued further. The disappointment filling the room felt far heavier than anger ever could. Later that afternoon, Grace packed a small suitcase inside her room in the staff quarters. She had already made her decision before Nathan arrived. When he found her folding the last of her clothes, he immediately understood. "You are leaving." Grace nodded slowly. "If I stay, they will continue asking you to choose between me and them." Nathan reached for her hands. "There is no choice to make." She smiled through tears she could no longer hide. "There is always a choice, Nathan. I simply refuse to let your child grow up believing love means destroying the people you care about." Before he could answer, she placed his hand gently against the envelope containing the ultrasound photograph. "Promise me one thing," she whispered. "No matter where life takes us, never stop loving this little boy." Nathan closed his eyes for a brief moment before giving the only promise that mattered. "I will love both of you for every day I have left." Early the next morning, before the estate fully awakened, Grace quietly walked through the front gates carrying her suitcase and the future beneath her heart. She never looked back because she knew if she saw Nathan standing there even once, she might lose the strength to keep walking. Hidden behind the library window, Nathan watched until she disappeared beyond the tree-lined road, realizing that the quietest goodbye of his life had also become the beginning of the longest 3 years either of them would ever endure. 3 years passed more quietly than anyone inside the Brooks estate ever imagined. Grace built a simple but peaceful life in a small neighborhood outside the city, renting a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a family-owned bakery where the smell of fresh bread drifted through the windows every morning. She worked long hours at a local cafe during the day and cleaned offices several evenings each week, never complaining because every paycheck meant another opportunity to give Noah a childhood filled with love instead of resentment. She never spoke bitterly about the Brooks family, and she never allowed disappointment to become part of her son's identity. Whenever Noah asked about his father, Grace smiled gently and answered the same way every time. "Your father is a good man who loves you very much." She never explained why they lived apart because she refused to place the weight of adult decisions onto the shoulders of a little boy. Unknown to Grace, Nathan had quietly kept the promise he made beneath the old oak tree. Through a trusted attorney and Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, anonymous payments covered Noah's health insurance, preschool tuition, and every unexpected expense that appeared along the way. Grace believed the financial assistance came from a charitable family foundation established years earlier by one of the Brooks companies. She accepted it with gratitude, never realizing that Nathan personally reviewed every payment himself. He celebrated Noah's birthdays alone each year by buying a small toy and placing it inside a wooden chest in his study, hoping that one day he would finally be able to give every unopened gift to the little boy who had never stopped occupying his thoughts. Meanwhile, the Brooks family continued encouraging Nathan to move forward with his life. Several introductions to accomplished young women were quietly arranged, yet each invitation ended the same way. Nathan attended out of courtesy, treated everyone with sincere respect, and politely declined every possibility of marriage. When relatives questioned his stubbornness, he simply answered, "My future was decided a long time ago." No one understood what he truly meant. Then came the invitation that changed everything. The family planned an elaborate birthday celebration for the patriarch's 85th birthday, bringing together relatives from across the country for the first time in years. Grace had no intention of attending until Mrs. Eleanor Hayes unexpectedly visited her apartment, carrying a carefully wrapped wooden box. Inside rested Nathan's old pocket watch, the one Grace had quietly protected years before after finding it damaged inside the library. Mrs. Hayes smiled kindly and said, "He deserves to have this back, and I believe it should come from you." Grace hesitated for several days before deciding she would deliver the keepsake herself, leave it with the staff, and quietly return home before anyone noticed. On the evening of the celebration, she dressed Noah in his favorite little sweater, promising they would only stay for a few minutes. Everything unfolded exactly as she planned until Noah caught sight of Nathan across the ballroom. The joyful child ran forward with innocent excitement, wrapping his tiny arms around Nathan's leg and calling him daddy before an entire room of distinguished guests. Now, as complete silence filled the grand ballroom once again, Grace finally reached Noah's side and gently rested her hand upon his shoulder. Before she could apologize or explain, the oldest member of the Brooks family slowly rose from his chair. His eyes settled first upon Grace, then upon the smiling little boy standing beside Nathan. In a calm but unmistakably firm voice, he spoke words that echoed through every corner of the room. "That child does not belong to this family." Noah looked up without understanding the meaning behind those words. He simply reached into his little coat pocket, pulled out a handmade birthday card covered with colorful crayon drawings, and walked toward the elderly man with the same trusting smile that had already begun changing hearts without him even realizing it. Noah stopped only a few feet away from the elderly patriarch and lifted the handmade birthday card with both hands. It was folded unevenly, colored with bright crayons, and decorated with a smiling family standing beneath a large tree. Across the front, written in careful block letters that only a young child could manage, were the words, "Happy Birthday, Great-Grandpa." The ballroom remained completely silent. The old man looked down at the little card without reaching for it. His expression remained reserved, shaped by decades of discipline and tradition. Yet there was something in the child's hopeful eyes that refused to be ignored. Noah smiled innocently and said, "Mommy says birthdays are for making people smile." Grace quietly closed her eyes for a brief moment, wishing she could spare her son from whatever came next. Nathan stepped forward, prepared to shield them both from another painful rejection. But before he could speak, the patriarch slowly accepted the card. He opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing of 4 people holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. One figure had silver hair, another wore a black suit, one had dark curly hair, and the smallest one stood happily between them all. Across the bottom, Noah had written, "Families stay together." The old man's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he looked at the simple drawing. Before anyone could interpret his silence, Nathan finally broke it. His voice remained calm, steady, and unmistakably sincere. "There is something everyone in this room deserves to know." Every guest turned toward him. 3 years ago, Grace never asked me to choose between her and my family. She chose to leave because she believed protecting my relationship with all of you mattered more than protecting her own happiness. She raised our son with kindness. She never spoke against this family. She never asked me for money. She never demanded recognition. The only promise she ever asked me to make was to love our child. Grace looked at Nathan with complete surprise. She had never known the full truth. Nathan continued, his eyes never leaving his grandfather. Every doctor appointment, every school payment, every birthday gift, every opportunity Noah received came from me, not because anyone ordered me to, but because I have been his father every single day, even from a distance. I have never accepted another relationship because my heart never belonged anywhere else. I loved Grace then. I love her now. I will continue loving her for the rest of my life. Tears quietly filled Grace's eyes as years of misunderstanding dissolved in a single moment. She had believed Nathan had sacrificed their future to preserve his family's approval. Instead, she discovered he had quietly remained faithful to the life they had once dreamed of building together. The ballroom, once filled with whispered judgment, became completely still. Even relatives who had questioned Nathan's decisions lowered their eyes, realizing that the woman they had dismissed had never sought wealth, status, or influence. She had simply chosen dignity over conflict. The patriarch looked once more at Noah's drawing before lifting his eyes toward Grace. For the first time in many years, his voice carried not authority, but reflection. 3 generations of this family believed sacrifice meant giving up what we loved for the sake of duty. He paused, looking slowly around the room. Perhaps we have misunderstood sacrifice all along. Those words settled over every guest with unexpected weight. In that quiet ballroom, the strongest tradition inside the Brooks family no longer seemed unbreakable. It seemed ready, at last, to become something better. The old patriarch slowly folded Noah's birthday card and held it against his chest for several quiet seconds before taking an unhurried step toward the little boy. Every eye in the ballroom followed him, uncertain of what would happen next. Noah simply looked up with the same innocent smile he had carried since walking into the room, completely unaware that generations of tradition rested upon the next few moments. The elderly man knelt carefully until he was face to face with the child. His voice, once known for commanding boardrooms and family councils, now carried a softness few people in the room had ever heard. "Did you really draw this for me?" Noah nodded happily. "Mommy said birthdays are about making people feel loved." Those simple words settled over the ballroom with more power than any speech. The patriarch smiled gently, a smile that had been absent for years, and opened his arms. Noah stepped forward without hesitation and wrapped his little arms around the older man. No one spoke. The silence itself became the loudest moment of the evening. Rising slowly, the patriarch turned toward Grace. His eyes reflected regret rather than pride. For 3 generations, this family believed that preserving our name mattered more than opening our hearts. Tonight, a little boy reminded me that a family is not measured by bloodlines alone. It is measured by the love we choose to protect. Grace stood speechless as he walked toward her. "Grace Johnson," he continued, "I judged you before I ever knew you. I saw your position instead of your character. I saw your circumstances instead of your courage. Yet while we guarded our reputation, you protected this family from bitterness. You raised our grandson with kindness when you had every reason to teach him resentment. That is a strength our family should honor, not reject." Tears quietly rolled down Grace's face as years of silent pain finally gave way to peace. Nathan reached for her hand, and this time she did not let go. The patriarch then removed an antique pocket watch from the inside pocket of his jacket, the same heirloom that had passed from one generation of the Brooks family to the next for decades. Instead of handing it to Nathan as tradition expected, he knelt once more before Noah. "One day," he said warmly, placing the watch into the little boy's tiny hands, "this will remind you that the greatest legacy you can leave your family is not wealth or influence. It is compassion." Around the ballroom, relatives who had once remained silent during Grace's rejection quietly approached her one by one. Some offered sincere apologies. Others simply smiled with genuine respect. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes stood near the back of the room, wiping away tears of relief as she watched the family she had served for so many years finally become worthy of the word home. Several months later, the Brooks estate looked different in ways no architect could have designed. Noah's laughter echoed through hallways that had once been filled only with formal conversations. Grace was welcomed not as an employee, but as a beloved member of the family, her warmth bringing life into rooms that tradition alone had never managed to fill. Nathan often watched his son race through the gardens while Grace laughed beside him, realizing that the future he had quietly protected for 3 years had finally become the present. Beneath the old oak tree where he and Grace had once exchanged impossible promises, they stood together as the evening sun painted the estate in shades of gold. Nathan looked at the family gathered nearby and gently squeezed Grace's hand. Nothing about the past could be changed, but everything about the future had already begun. And on that unforgettable day, the Brooks family finally discovered that dignity is never inherited through generations. It is earned through humility, protected by love, and remembered every time one heart chooses compassion over prejudice.